Thank you all for coming to Senator Schatz's town hall on Kauai. Without further ado, I'd like to invite the mayor to say a few words of welcome.
Okay, good afternoon and aloha. We have a great opportunity, everybody, to be able to gather here, of course, at this beautiful school, number one. Number two, of course, our dear senator is here to share his mana'o and, of course, listen and be able to share some of the good things that are happening overall throughout our state and some of the great things he's doing. I got to tell you, the big part for Kauai, remember now, we're transforming our island into walkable, bikeable, complete streets, safe routes to school and all that. Right? And we're forming our downtown core, and he was very, very instrumental in helping us attain the $13.8 million Tiger grant that we got, you guys. Okay? I have to open up with that because that's a big part for all of us, working with the schools and, you know, our Safe Routes to School program and all of that. So that's up at the forefront. But there's many other issues that we face overall as leaders throughout this beautiful state. And so I just wanted to aloha you guys and say thank you for coming and introduce our senator. Give a nice aloha from Kauai, Senator Brian Schatz. Hey!
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the warm welcome. Nice to see you. Nice to see everybody here. Listen, what I'm going to do, because we have a good crowd here today, is try to go through my initial remarks as quickly as possible and get to as many questions as possible. We live in interesting times. And so, you know, I think a lot of you are aware of the fights that I'm in and the stuff that I'm working on, and so I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time just giving you my own talking points and my own views, you know, for an hour or more. That's not what this is about. But I did want to give you at least some perspective into the way I approach the job in this unique time in history. The first part of the job for me continues to be to secure federal resources for the state of Hawaii, for the island of Kauai, for Kauai County. I'm on the Appropriations Committee. There's a reason for that. When I think about my predecessors, especially the great Senator Daniel K. Inouye, you know, he had, yeah, please. He did a lot of things, right? He was a war hero. He presided over the Iran-Contra hearings. He became a national leader. He was considered for the vice presidency. There's nobody that was more well-loved in the United States Senate than my predecessor. But one of the things that he never forgot is that the first job of a senator from Hawaii is to bring home resources for key priorities. And so I got on the Appropriations Committee, and there are 12 subcommittees related to appropriations, and I'm on a couple of the key ones related to priorities for the state of Hawaii. Labor, Health, and Human Services, Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development. I just got on the Commerce, Justice, and Science subcommittee, which actually has, so it's great. It's the Department of Justice and all of that, but it's also the NOAA budget, the National Weather Service budget, and most of our science agencies. And I'll just offer you this. It is fair to say that nobody really anticipated that we were going to do as well in the appropriations process as we did. We worked very, very hard on a bipartisan basis to make sure that federal funding for key priorities for Hawaii, but also key priorities for our country actually came through. So in the wake of their first attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act, they kind of recalibrated how much risk they wanted to take. And what we did was a bipartisan appropriations bill for this fiscal year that is actually even better than the one we negotiated during the Obama era. So what does that mean? That means stable and slightly increased funding for things like clean energy, stable and slightly increased funding for transportation infrastructure, for our research agencies. EPA actually received a less than 1% cut. We would like it to be a 0% cut, but in this era, that was okay. A 2% increase for the National Park Service. We did really well in the appropriations process, and I do consider that to be my core responsibility, even as we're sort of engaging in a lot of very important and sometimes partisan fights related to who we are as a society, what kind of republic we have, related to the rule of law, related to constitutional questions, related to world peace and world stability and climate and all of those things that I know a lot of us care very, very deeply about. We still need to take care of each other in the short run, and we've done a reasonable job of that. I maintain vigilance literally every day to try to watch those line items and to make sure that we get the resources that we need. So the first thing I focus on is federal appropriations. The second thing is, there's just no doubt about it, we're in a unique time. And even though I have a instinct towards bipartisanship and still work with my Republican colleagues where the opportunity presents itself, there are a lot of things that are just a fight. The Affordable Care Act is worth fighting about. Climate is worth fighting about. Civil liberties and civil justice and a Department of Justice that we can rely upon is worth fighting about. And so that, like it or not, you know, I can wake up one morning and think I'm going to focus on federal appropriations, but then a new unconstitutional outrage may emerge and overtake that day's priority. So I do have to watch those, and I believe that I have a responsibility to participate as, you know, the Democrats in the Senate are the tip of the spear when it comes to holding back some really awful things from happening, not just to Hawaii, but to our beloved country. And the final thing I'll just mention very briefly is that in the middle of all this, there are still opportunities for bipartisanship. I saw Rand Paul yesterday saying really bad things about climate, really untrue things about climate, and yet today we introduced legislation together around criminal justice reform. And so part of what you have to do if you're in the Senate and you're going to be effective is to sort of fight like cats and dogs on the stuff that you got to fight about, and then let it go and coordinate and collaborate where there's an opportunity. I'll give you one other example before opening it up to questions. I believe so strongly in the future of telehealth. And the basic idea of telehealth is that nowadays, see, about 10 years ago, if you were told to interact with a clinical care provider through a device, most people would be irritated at that suggestion. Now, people like the idea, not everybody. And there are certainly procedures and other things that can only be done in person. But when you're talking about rural areas, when you're talking about access to specialists, when you are talking about dermatology and psychology and asthma, a lot of the observational stuff that can be done can either be done with a device on your body, right? Or via a sort of a more secure version of Skype or FaceTime. And telehealth will reduce costs, increase access and quality, especially for a place like Kauai. The private sector has already picked it up. The Department of Defense is already doing it. The VA is already doing it. The problem in the marketplace, and I'm sorry to get a little too technical, but this is important, is that Medicare is the biggest payer in the marketplace. So if you've got a medical practice that's 35% Medicare, and you're being asked, there we go, and you say you've got a hospital or a small, doctor's group, and 35% of your stuff is Medicare, but Medicare will not reimburse for telehealth because there's a law against it. So the problem is, if you're trying to transform the way you deliver care, you can't spend money on a system and you'll only get 65% of the reimbursement for it, right? And you can't have two parallel systems. And so a lot of the full-on transformation of the healthcare system as it relates to utilizing technology is hung up on Section 1834M of the Medicare and Social Security Act. Why does that matter? We repeal that, and not just Medicare, but the whole private sector will change as it relates to using technology to get care. We now have 9 Republicans and 10 Democrats on my bill, including some of the more powerful Republicans in the United States Senate, and a bipartisan group of more than 30 on the House side, That bill has been integrated into a bigger bill, because that's always how it goes. You got to kind of hitch a ride on a big bill. And it's moving along. And so in the middle of fighting Orrin Hatch and John Thune about whatever we're fighting Orrin Hatch and John Thune about, we're absolutely collaborating in this space. So even though I know a lot of people are, strongly opposed to what Donald Trump is doing, and you want to see, some fight in me, but I also think that it's really important to find common ground where there's an opportunity to find common ground. And so that's not the only thing I'm doing on a bipartisan basis. It's about one of 15 projects that I'm working on. But I also wanted you to have some hope that there are patriots on both sides of the aisle that are trying to get stuff done in the middle of all this awful fighting. So with that, I will, what do I do? Okay, Malia is going to call names out.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to call 2 names at a time, and if you can make your way to the benches right here, we can start with the questions. And I apologize if I mispronounce your name. The first 2 names are Susan Storm and Mimsy Bure.
Hi.
Hi.
And thank you for coming to Kauai.
Thank you.
Living on this island, in this state, and we are a blue state, I'm wondering what we can do as a community to be effective in supporting you in these fights that you are having. And any way you can help us understand the logic on the bipartisan side. It's like a lot of it escapes me. It's like now that you're going to be working on the science department, it's like, how can science be ignored? It's science. So that's my question.
So the first question I like, because there are a lot of people who say, well, you're going to vote right, so should I call you? I'll just tell you that the amount of engagement that I've seen from Hawaii citizens since the election is probably at least 3 times the normal amount, and in certain days it's 50 times the normal amount. I mean, the Capitol switchboard was so flooded that people had to actually buy cloud storage for voicemail. It's really an extraordinary thing, and it has kept me on my toes. And so don't take it for granted that just because I'm a Democrat that I understand fully what you're prioritizing. Because I go up for 3 weeks at a time, and I need to be held accountable too. And so I would say don't take it for granted that just because we're Democrats that we know what the priorities are. The second thing I'll offer is that everybody knows folks on the mainland, and in a social media world, it is important to communicate with anybody you know, anywhere, about what you think is important in terms of what's happening to the country. On the bipartisanship question, look, I'll just give you a simple example. Lindsey Graham and I have developed a good working relationship, and except we don't talk about reproductive rights and we don't talk about war and peace. But he's, and I hesitate to say this because I don't want to get him in trouble in South Carolina, he's actually pretty good on climate, and he's really good on the State Department. So when there was a proposal to cut the State Department budget by 30%, he's the chairman of the subcommittee on state and foreign operations, which is basically the State Department Appropriations Subcommittee. And I wrote down on my little yellow pad, Graham, Department of State, because I was going to talk to Lindsey, and he, within 30 minutes, said that budget is dead on arrival and we're going to fully fund the State Department. So it's just important to remember that some of these folks have, they have backgrounds, they have political imperatives, they have constituents that are different than mine, right? And we want to encourage them to find moments for bipartisan leadership, which is not to say we want to always give them all the space that they need, because they need a little push once in a while too. But I have seen some of the more encouraging things that have happened in the last 4 or 5 months have been because of a bipartisan group quietly doing the right thing. You don't have to clap, we can just keep going.
Ernest Blackowiak and Herman Ferreira.
Hi, thank you so much for being here and for being so responsive to our needs. I'm Susan Storm, and I have a question related to the telehealth that you're submitting. I think that's fabulous. My husband Jerry died 2 years ago from complications with Parkinson's disease. And on this island, there is no movement disorder specialist and only one neurologist to help people with ALS, Parkinson's, MS. And so we always have to fly somewhere to get treatment. I'm wondering about the bill, and I just got off the phone with Dr. Ray Dorsey, who evidently you went to school with his brother because he knew who you were. And he said, oh, your senator is really heading this up, because we talked about the possibility of bringing telemedicine to Kauai. So he talked about the Medi-Cal issue, and he also talked, or Medicare, and he also talked about licensing of doctors from other states not being able to practice here. So I'd like to know if your bill addresses those things, and how can you help us get the specialists we need here on the island?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I'm sorry about your loss.
Thank you.
But this would have been a perfect opportunity to utilize a possibly world-renowned specialist from wherever, right? Yeah, our bill does address the licensure question, but primarily the reimbursement question, because we have good specialists if you sort of aggregate them all across the state of Hawaii and make sure they are available across whatever islands. We can solve some of these problems. So we're working as hard as we can to get this bill passed, and the main thing we want to do is let it move at the right pace so that people feel that this is a truly bipartisan effort. Right now we have the chairman of the Finance Committee, the chairman of the Commerce Committee, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, all Republicans, and the chairman of the National Republican Senate Committee, the guy who's in charge of running people against me, all on this bill. So this thing actually has a chance of being enacted relatively soon. I mean, and in Senate time, that's years, but really this is a transformational change. And every time I talk about it, someone in the audience thinks, wow, I could have used that, or my husband could have used that, or my child could have used that. I mean, the medically fragile, right? People who just live far away and don't want to just drive down, wait, it might be 3 or 4 hours just to get a reading. And now with remote patient monitoring, you can stick a device on your wrist and all those data sets will be immediately fed to your clinician. Simple example, dermatology. Kaiser does telehealth now. So because I'm in the sun periodically, and now it's really periodically, but I'm very careful about, when you see a spot or whatever. So I emailed my PCP. I said, what do you, can you get me a dermatology appointment? He said, just take a picture of the thing with your iPhone and I'll forward it to dermatology. So bing, bing, and then within like 48 hours, they said, you're good. And think how much time that saved me and how much money that saved the system. It's such a simple thing. Kaiser gets to do it because they make their own choices about what they reimburse for. They're a closed system. But without Medicare, the law around Medicare being changed, we can't do it. I'm going to try to be quicker in my answers. Go ahead.
Hi, Senator Schatz, Ernest Bakowiak. My question is a little more kind of on the national stage. We see a lot of airtime devoted to what we could call the integrity of our electoral process. I'm sorry. I better just hold it a little taller. But my question has to do more with things that happen kind of in our country. I'm talking about voter suppression, racial or partisan redistricting, and of course the enormous amount of money in our political system. And I just wanted to know your thoughts about this.
You're right. In fact, I thought you were going to talk about another challenge to American democracy, which was the active measures in 2016. But you're asking about Citizens United, which really was the single biggest, single worst decision when it comes to American democracy, at least in a generation and possibly in American history. That can only be reversed through a constitutional convention, which is nearly impossible to execute, and I'm not sure we want to do a constitutional convention. I like our Constitution. I'd rather have a majority on the Supreme Court, and we know that we have to win presidential elections and Senate races in order to accomplish that. Interestingly, on racially based gerrymandering, the U.S. Supreme Court just came down with some pretty encouraging decisions with some pretty unlikely allies. Never thought I'd say, right on, Clarence Thomas, but right on, Clarence Thomas. And this will have an immediate impact in North Carolina gerrymandering, the Texas gerrymandering, Wisconsin, Ohio, Illinois. They're all pretty bad, and that has to change. On voter suppression, some of that can be solved legislatively, but we again have to win state houses across the country, and some of that the judiciary is stepping in. But because the Voting Rights Act hasn't been renewed, we don't have the same protections that we used to have even just 4 or 5 years ago, and certain legislatures are doing the most draconian things. Now, I think they're overreaching and the courts are stepping in, but I want you to know we're working on that as hard as we can. I'll just add one last thing, which is one thing we in Hawaii do well is we develop a bench of politicians at every level, county council, state legislature. One of the things that the Democratic Party nationally failed to do is care about local races. And as a result, we basically eviscerated a generation of possibilities, right? And so we don't have a lot of young, talented members of the legislature, so when there is an opening, they get to run. If you notice, for a lot of those Senate races last year, we had people who had run for the Senate previously, which is fine, but my view is that we have to build a bench, both because we ought to build a bench and because we ought to care about local issues. So thank you for the question.
Janice Bond and Katie Vercelli.
Mahalo, Senator, for coming. My name is Herman Ferreira. I'm a homosexual man born and raised in Hawaii. And one of the main concerns of mine is with such a conservative government that we have, I'm concerned about the preservation of our rights because I'm of the belief that this country was based on considering how it all formed on an expansion of rights, preservation of that rights. And my concern, too, is what you said earlier about that right. I believe Roe versus Wade is not the abortion amendment. It's not the pro-choice amendment for me. It's the right to my body. And telling the government, the U.S. government, to stay out of my body, be it a woman or a man. So what are you doing, or do you see anything that's in our Congress that will erode that rights? And the other question I have is, and you said it earlier, is there's old laws on our books. What are you doing to get rid of that, like especially with pakalolo? Pakalolo is like, I don't think if it's a gateway drug, personally, but that's my opinion. And I'm seeing that there's so many people that are in jail for just recreational use that shouldn't be in there, and especially with this Sessions coming in and just laying down the laws, and while he's making drug penalties or sentences going to be even harsher. Yeah. So what are you doing for that?
Thank you for the question. On gay rights, to be blunt, I think that in the United States Congress, the gay community is not currently target number one. But I want to make this point, that they don't mind doing each against all. They don't mind saying, we're going to leave the gay community alone and target the Muslim community. Or we're going to leave Muslims alone and target women or children or the elderly or African American communities or the immigrant community. And so my own view is that we have to have a core conviction of equality, of opportunity, and equity for all. which is, I think about where we are right now, and I look at Bernard, and I think about, the strength of the plantation Democratic Party, right? It was Filipinos and Japanese and Puerto Ricans, right? And Chinese and Koreans and progressive Haoles and the ILWU and government workers, and they all had their own sort of priority, right? Not all of them were in the Democratic Party for exactly the same set of reasons, but they were in the Democratic Party for exactly the same set of principles, right? And so don't let the Trump administration be okay with one group and not okay with the other. That is going to be their game for as long as they exist. So, second question on marijuana laws. They make no sense. The war on drugs has been a failure. It just didn't work. There are two reasons, sort of two policy issues here. One is this question of, to what extent are there opportunities to alleviate pain or to provide so-called medicinal benefits as they relate to marijuana. The only way to figure that out is to move it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 or Schedule 3, which is essentially taking it out of the category where you can't even do FDA testing, right? Because we actually don't know. People have anecdotal experiences related to whether marijuana may make them feel better with mental health issues, with pain and cancer and nausea, but we just don't have any research because you're not allowed to conduct the research, right? The other problem with the federal law as it relates to marijuana being residing in Schedule 1 is that then when you get caught with a relatively minor amount of marijuana, you can be imprisoned. And a good friend Cory Booker makes this point a lot. Whites and blacks, young men and women use drugs at the same percentage, but a black man is 5 or 6 times as likely to be incarcerated for the same thing. And so that's a justice question. That's not merely a question of whether something is medicine or not, or whether someone morally ought to be using something. To the extent that we have laws and they're being applied differently based on race, that's a civil justice question. So thank you.
Senator, thank you for being here today and giving us this opportunity. I want to talk a little bit about military. When myself and anybody else signs up to join the service, it's like writing a blank check of our lives. In doing that, we anticipate that the American government will do the right thing by us and only take us to war when it's absolutely necessary. Yet we have a list here of over 50 countries since World War II that we've tried to overthrow or have overthrown their governments. Over 50. That is not doing the right thing by the service personnel. Period. At the back of the list, it shows 2 of the countries that are front and center on the news today. Syria and Iran. Neither one of those countries have ever overthrown any other government, and yet over 50 from our country. Who are the warmongers? This is disturbing. The other part of the issue is 1967, one of our military Navy ships was brutally attacked. After 8 hours of surveillance, 34 men died, 172 were injured on a ship of about 300 people. That's 50 years ago in 6 more days, 50 years ago. This has been hidden. When the survivors were given medals of honor, etc., instead of having a nice ceremony at the White House, which normally takes place, it was done in a warehouse on a military base where nobody knew and understood what was going on. To this day, 50 years, these people that survived, and now quite a few of them have passed away. There's only a handful left. It's time to bring this issue forefront and honor at least the few that are still alive. They served our country, and I say, we all signed a blank check with our lives, anticipating that the government will do right by us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Look, I would dispute the use of the word warmonger, but I would tell you that the basic idea that the United States Congress has the sole authority to declare war is something that we have to get back to. It is important to understand that the war authorization that we're operating under in multiple countries, this is the first war authorization without a geographic or time constraint. So this war authorization expires when there is no Al-Qaeda or affiliated organizations. And so what we need is a more narrowly tailored authorization of the use of military force, AUMF. And this is something that my colleague Tim Kaine and a good friend of mine, Chris Murphy from Connecticut, and I have been working on, because I do think we should be at war with ISIS. But I think that should be defined. And I think that civilian oversight of the military is a basic principle of our constitutional democracy. And what that means is that General Mattis and Secretary Tillerson and the White House ought to go to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and articulate their strategy as it relates to ISIS, right? And then they should go to the Defense Appropriations Committee, on which I sit, and say, here are the requirements. Here's what we're going to need. They can go to the Intel Committee and likewise do that. But the process of articulating what we need and what we're trying to achieve is part of the way the country is supposed to work. And so we need to get back to that. And we have not done that under Obama. And we have found ourselves backing into military actions because as things get worse, we feel like we must take some action. And so I have been pushing for a new AUMF conversation. This is a bipartisan group that is trying to narrow the scope of the current AUMF so it is not endless war wherever you want. So thank you for that question.
Hello, Senator. Hello, my name is Janice Bond.
I know.
I am Kauai's commissioner for the Hawaii Commission for National and Community Service, and I was made aware that funding might be cut to the Corporation for National and Community Service. The Commission oversees the AmeriCorps funding, and for Kauai, these are programs such as foster grandparents, senior companions, RSVP, Kupu, Habitat for Humanity, Legal Aid, Malama Kauai, and other extended agencies. Are you aware that they are being cut? I was just notified today that I'm supposed to go to the Seattle conference this month for National and Community Service, and if funding is being cut, I don't want to go.
So thank you for that question. I am aware of the Mulvaney-Trump budget, which cuts, I think zeroes out the Corporation for National Community Service. Let me just be as crisp as I can here. The Trump budget will not be enacted, okay? And that goes for CNS, that goes for the State Department cuts. They proposed a 30% cut to the Coast Guard. They proposed billions of dollars in cuts to the Centers for Disease Control and National Institutes of Health. I mean, this was really rotten stuff. If you saw Mulvaney talk about cutting school lunch, and he was asked about cutting school lunch, and he said, you know, there's no data that indicates that kids get better test scores if they're fed. And I was thinking, well, there are two things here. First of all, if that were true, so what? You feed the kids, right? You feed the kids. Second of all, it's also not true. There's actually plenty of data that sort of matches up. I mean, real proper research that matches up with everyone's instinct, which is nobody can learn, nobody can function if they're hungry. I mean, all of you in your work context, if you skip breakfast and lunch, you're going to be not very effective in your job by around 1 or 2. And so the budget cuts that were proposed by Mulvaney were so draconian that it caused the Republicans to just say, dead on arrival. And that's what they did. And so, just as an example, just a little inside baseball for you. They were going to cut the Coast Guard by 30%, and Thad Cochran, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, who really likes the Coast Guard, increased it by $250 million. And on the Corporation for National Community Service, Lindsey Graham is a real advocate for it, Chris Coons and others. So we're working on that, specifically as it relates to the programs that you participate in, and I know, and I used to when I was a not-for-profit executive. They're not going anywhere. So remember, these cuts are awful, and they will splash across the headlines. Budgets are budgets. Appropriations are what you should watch, and so far on appropriations, we've done okay.
Michael Ching and Lynn Taylor.
This is brief. Hi. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for coming to Kauai to hear our concerns. It really means a lot. You came all this way. Sometimes we feel a little bit forgotten out here. And really quickly, I might have had an opportunity to come to your office in Washington with my daughter in January before the Women's March. And I just wanted to say how wonderful it was to meet your staff in person. I really encourage anybody to go to Washington and see it in action. So thank you. My question is brief. I just want to know, and it's a little bit similar to what somebody asked earlier, from your perspective as a senator, what do you think is the most effective way that we can have our voices heard locally? I know we talked about the phone calls, but from your perspective, being in Washington, what do you think is the most effective thing we can do locally?
So thank you for the question, and I'll just sort of, I gave a commencement address, and these kids want to know how they can change the world. And I'll give you the same advice that I gave them, which is, start wherever you are and do whatever you can. And don't worry too much about if it's exactly the right thing to be doing. Because everybody needs to do everything at their disposal. If you can, if you want to get involved in a campaign on the mainland, financially or via social media, do that. If you want to make sure that Hawaii remains committed to its 100% clean energy statute, do that. If you want to help Bernard and everybody who's working so hard on revitalization and all these exciting changes happening on Rice Street, do that. Start wherever you are and do whatever you can, and don't worry too much about whether this fits into some grand strategic vision. What I have decided, and this is a little hard for me because I like to make strategy and I like to execute it and I like to be disciplined about it, but with this new citizens movement, right, with 5 million people marching and tens of millions of people engaged on a almost minute-by-minute basis, what I realize is that we can't control this movement. This movement is grassroots up, and that's the fun part. And actually, I think that's the reason that the Democratic Party failed in 2016, is that we were, even the grassroots was sort of waiting for things to be settled in what they perceive to be power centers, right? And I think we have to give up that model. There will be a presidential campaign at some other point. There will be opportunities for people to coalesce around specific projects. Climate is a good one of them. But my view is just get started and just trust that whatever you're doing is the thing that needs to be done. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lynn Taylor. Thank you so much for being here. It's pretty funny that I put this question in because I'm not really that versed on the subject, and I should have put my husband's name. But I had several people ask me, and I knew they weren't going to be able to make it. So here's the question: it's regarding net neutrality. If you could address that issue. Oh, thank you. So all I know is don't mess with my internet, and that's about it. And what can we do to help would be good to know,
great.
too. Thank
So
you.
I apologize because I'm going to do a thing that I hate it when other politicians do it, but I just for context, there are committees and there are subcommittees. There are chairmen and then ranking members. So if you're the chairmen and women, chairs and ranking members. Which means my highest ranking minority member, right? So I am the highest ranking Democrat on the Telecommunications and Internet Committee in the U.S. Senate. So I have dug really deeply into the net neutrality question. So what is net neutrality? Okay. It's actually not that complicated. You pay your ISP, right? Oceanic Time Warner, soon to be Charter Communications, right? Or Hawaiian Telcom. There may be a few others, but you pay your ISP for access to the internet. And after the Open Internet Order, which was adopted last year, the rule is, which has the force of law, that the ISPs can't block, throttle, or pay or make you pay for fast lanes and slow lanes. So what does that mean? An ISP can't tell you that either based on content or based on a commercial arrangement that you don't get access to everything on the internet on an equal basis. Now remember, the old railroads were monopolies because they would control access to the market, right? And this is a similar analogy. The ISP is your gateway to the internet. What happens when the ISP owns content? What would prevent them from privileging their content and making it run fast and their competitors' content to run slow? The answer is nothing if net neutrality is repealed. So your access to the internet as you know it is based on something called net neutrality, which means I pay my money, maybe I pay a little too much, but you don't get to tell me where to go and how fast I get to download anything. I'm on the internet, right? I can pick a browser, I can go to Hulu or Netflix or Facebook or Breitbart or Daily Kos or whatever I want to do. You don't get to stop me and you don't get to slow me down. But there's nothing in the law, if this thing is repealed, that would prevent an ISP from saying, can I interest you in our totally closed ecosystem where everything moves really fast and we don't charge you as much per month? Just so happens it's all our stuff, right? That's not the internet. That's what they call in the internet parlance a walled garden, right? It's like internet jail. It's all their stuff. Looks the same as the internet, but when you Google something or you try to find whether it's entertainment or news content or apps, you may not get what you want. It's sort of like being in the App Store all the time. You're sort of in the universe of Apple and you know you can't get anything else. That's one thing, but you've already decided you're going to be an Apple person, right? I live with that because I like my Apple products, right? But I also understand that there's a whole world of stuff I don't get access to. With an ISP, it's different. That's your basic gateway into the internet. So there is a public comment period. It's 90 days. We're about 20 days into it. There have been 2.8 million public comments submitted, almost all of them against what Ajit Pai is trying to do to the open internet. I would encourage you to submit comments. This will make a difference. There were 3.8 million comments last year for the open internet. My goal is to get to 8 million to retain the open internet. So thank you for asking that question.
Ray Catania and Leanne Spencer.
Nice to see you.
Senator. Under the Trump administration, it seems that hate crimes against minorities, women, gays, lesbians, religious minorities have just opened the doors. The gates have overflooded. What protections can Congress enact to protect minorities?
Thank you for that question. I think you're right. I think there are two things here. One is what the law says. Three things. What the law says, what the Department of Justice does, and then what environment has been created as a result of this administration. Okay? So we have hate crime statutes on the books. We could do better? Absolutely. But in my view, the problem right now is the Department of Justice is really not enforcing those laws and has prioritized other things, which at least I can't know someone's heart. I will just say their impact is disproportionately against the vulnerable, right? But I think that the reason that we're seeing all of this across the country is because maybe more so than ever, at least in my lifetime of presidents and presidencies, that you have a president who is not our moral leader. And who, at least tacitly or implicitly, gives permission, gives voice to some of the most vile instincts out there. And that, I think, is what we have to fight against. I think there is an appropriate place for anger in all of this. I think there is an appropriate place for outrage in all of this. But I also think that when it comes to being the antidote to what's happening at the very top, that the antidote is not necessarily more anger and more hate. That I think we should be angry at Betsy DeVos for what she's doing to public education. I think we should be angry at Mick Mulvaney. I think we should be mad at Scott Pruitt about climate. I think the response to Trump and Sessions as it relates to the environment they're creating around race and color and creed and national origin is to love each other more. And that's what we have to do.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for coming to Kauai. I represent Kauai Indivisible. My name is Leanne Spencer. And I know you said that really get out there, do it all, do everything, do whatever you can. This is not something that we want to control, and we agree with that. And we've told people, hey, this is grassroots. If you want to go do this or you want to go do that, that's great. We do a weekly newsletter trying to get people aware of what the current issues are and things like the net neutrality comment period, things like that. But I still get asked all the time, how do I get started? Which activities are more beneficial? Our Indivisible guidelines are all about focusing on your local members, but our local members are already doing what we want them to do. So thank you, and we encourage people to say thank you, but if you had a choice between us doing sign wavings and rallies on issues, between contacting you and coming to your office, between lobbying other members of the cabinet perhaps, or government agencies about developing local impact stories perhaps that you could use in things, being able to sponsor out-of-state candidates or races. I mean, what would you have us do?
So thank you for the question. And I don't want to demur too much on this question, but I feel two constraints. First of all, it's a serious question, and I don't want to answer it off the top of my head necessarily, except to say I'd be happy to be in a dialogue with you around that. The other aspect is I serve on the ethics committee, and I am here with my United States Senate staff. This is not a campaign event. And so it would not be appropriate for me to direct you to get involved in this or that campaign, although I know that's at least one aspect of what Indivisible and what other organizations are doing. So I'm sorry I can't give you a more fulsome answer, but that's what the internet is for. I'd be happy to kind of go back and forth with you, and I'd be happy to sort of answer that question. But it's an iterative process, right? I mean, I think the better way to ask the question, at least from my standpoint, is you can kind of say, we're thinking about doing this, does it make sense? Because I still don't want to say, okay, here's the rank order of tactics, right? So I remember the Obama campaign in 2008, and my now chief of staff and I were trying to organize it from from Honolulu, and some folks wanted to do a big sign waving and a picture on Hanalei Bridge. And you have to understand, my chief of staff is like a data guy. He's he runs campaigns, he's turnout models, and all analytics and all that stuff. And so he's looking at me like, that doesn't seem like a good use of their time. But they were really insistent. And what we realized was, hey, they want to stand on Hanalei Bridge and take a really cool picture. Let them stand on Hanalei Bridge and take a really cool picture. You know what happened? They won Hanalei huge, right? And had we killed their fight and said, no, we want you using our data sets and doing our technical stuff, I think they would have lost their enthusiasm. They would have felt sort of their spirit crushed, and it wouldn't have worked. So part of it is, sure, I'll give you my guidance about, in a vacuum, what I think is interesting and important to do. But the most important thing is to keep this momentum going through 2018 and 2020. And some of that means that people got to do what they like doing, right? Some people hate knocking on doors. Some people love it. Some people like sign waving. I don't know that many people who like sign waving, but all right, you. But I guess what I'm saying is, it's also understanding that growing grassroots organizations means cultivating it as a muscle and thinking about how do I get this group to be bigger and bigger. And then, listen, in the last 7 weeks of a really hot campaign, then I will get very, very directive and say, here's what you ought to do. But right now it's about building team.
Okay, all right, thank you. Glenda Dellenstar and Julie Hayward.
How's it, Brian? My name is Raymond Catania, and I'm concerned about workers' rights, wages, working conditions, sick leave, healthcare, and our right to organize unions, yeah? And that's where I come from. The question I'd like to ask you is, and I've heard you give it before in the past, what is your stand on increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour? I think there's going to be some legislation in Congress on this. And what would you do to encourage the legislature in Hawaii to take this up? That's the first question I got. The second one is, what is your stand on having a basic minimum of at least 1 week sick leave for our workers who are on the bottom, who work in the hotel industry, primarily as waitresses, waiters, cooks, whatever. Maybe more than 40% do not have sick leave. A lot of them have small children. Mm-hmm. They cannot take time off, and they can spread their colds and whatever to the customers. And the third thing, which is very, very important to the Hawaii Government Employees Association, of which I'm a retiree of, is our right to organize unions, and in particular, the so-called right to work, which is nothing more than the right to work for less, where you don't have to not only not join a union, you don't have to pay dues, but our organizations are fighting for everybody to get a better wage and better working conditions, what have you. Also, I wanted to mention is that workers and working people as a whole, we're on the move. International Workers' Day in Honolulu, we had over 1,000 workers that showed up, many of them people of color, over half women. And we're demanding that working people be treated with respect. That means decent wages, health care, and everything else. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for everything you do. Thank you for what HGA does. Thank you for what the labor movement means to Hawaii and to the country. Let me just make a few broad comments about labor. Sherrod Brown and I, Sherrod is the senator from Ohio, have talked a lot about the role of organized labor in politics in the United States. And frankly, it's not just the legislative or public policy questions. It's understanding that in this broad tent of progressivism, that sometimes people forget that the core of the Democratic Party is organized labor. That's the core of the Democratic Party. And sometimes, for those of us who didn't come from a union background, we can forget that. We can think that it's just sort of part of the patchwork. It's the basis of the Democratic Party, and certainly in the state of Hawaii. So not just from the policy standpoint, because we stand for working men and women and working families, but also because you have these institutional forces that are against progressivism, right? Post Citizens United, you have these super PACs and these corporations that make 20-year strategies to dismantle what we know as the basic bargain. And the biggest institutional counterweight to what those guys do is frankly not the DNC, it's labor. So even if you're not personally impacted by a union, understand that we stand shoulder to shoulder with labor, and they are the strongest and biggest and most reliable and most committed institution to our side that there is in the United States. So that's worth remembering. I'm for a $15 minimum wage. If I'm not on it, I was planning on getting on it. I think it was introduced or is about to be introduced relatively shortly. I like the idea of one statutory 1 week sick leave for shift workers. I have a rule which I've only broken once or twice related to not opining on bills that happen at the Hawaii State Legislature. I think I did it for gay marriage and one other thing, but generally speaking, I'll try to avoid telling the legislature what I think they should be doing because that's their kuleana, not mine. So although I support a Hawaii State local minimum wage, I won't push them around.
Thank you for coming to Kauai. I'm Glenda Dellenstar. I have a question for Hawaii. I hope the tsunami warning system, there's rumors on the internet that it's not being funded. Is that part of the DOA that it's not? Yeah. Okay, good. That's what I was hoping. But on the broader issue, which you kind of touched on earlier, our elections, they've been under attack, not just by Russians, but gerrymandering, voter suppression. And there's a lot of evidence for voting machine hacking internally also. What can we do? First of all, is it just a dream that we can ever have federal standards instead of this state-by-state crap? And what are we going to do about, just your thoughts on that?
So thank you for that question. Just generally about, first of all, Tsunami Warning Center, there were things percolating on the internet. Tsunami Warning Center is not going to get cut. And again, this is all in the Trump budget, right? But a budget is a proposal. Listen, when it was the Obama budget, it was also, unfortunately, dead on arrival, right? I mean, the legislature holds the purse strings as a matter of constitutional law, and now I like that, but last time I didn't like it as much. But that's Tsunami Warning Center. On voter integrity, we have something called the Help America Vote Act, which does establish basic federal standards. My own view is that there is no particular reason to leave it to every county in the United States to invent their own procedures. Most modern nations have a nationalized process. And I'm also, as much as a tech fanatic as I am, I'm a fan of the paper ballot. I'm a fan of audits. I think you can ensure the integrity of the count. I do not believe that the vote counting was a problem in 2016, but I think we should worry about that going forward. Not because of any specific intelligence that I may have, but because I think that is foundational to who we are. Finally, I'll just mention that I'm surprised that we're an hour in and we haven't talked about it. I'll just talk about Russia and active measures and all the rest of it. I don't want anybody to get attached to we should do a special commission and not a special prosecutor or a special counsel. The Intelligence Committee should stop its work and the judicial. Listen, every single avenue for investigation ought to be pursued. And the reason for that is that with Mueller, we have what appears to be an active counterintelligence and criminal investigation. And that's the FBI's side of the shop, and that is necessarily going to be something we don't hear about I mean, the unfortunate aspect of the appointment of a special counsel is everybody's going to lawyer up, and it's a criminal and counterintelligence investigation, and we won't hear about it very much anyway until it's over. But that is to make sure that justice is served. Okay. At the legislative level, we have a different obligation. One is to inform the public what exactly happened last time. And that's why, although the Intelligence Committee is primarily configured for classified hearings, they understand the need to do some of this in open session. And so that's something my buddy Mark Warner has worked really hard on, because even at the staff level, even at the Democratic staff level, they're not really set up for open hearings. They like to go into the SCIF. Even if 98% of what's being talked about is not classified, they just safer for them to just go into the secure conference facility and not let anybody know anything, because they're the Intel Committee. That's now happening, most of it in public, so that the American people know exactly what happened. Maybe even more important than knowing what happened is to come up with a policy suite and some funding to make sure that this never happens again, right? And then finally, and the Judiciary Subcommittee is doing some pretty good stuff with Lindsey Graham and Sheldon Whitehouse. And then finally, I think eventually we ought to establish a special commission, a la the 9/11 Commission, but none of those are mutually exclusive. And it could be that media reporting is what helps us to get to the bottom of this faster than any other legislative or executive branch. But all I'm saying is let's do all of it, and let's not pit any of these sort of tactics against each other. Everything must be done to get to the bottom of this.
Evan Price and Ruby Papp.
My name is Julie Hayward, and I'm a member of the Indivisible here on Kauai as well. So first, a big thank you and appreciation for being active and vocal about what's been happening over the last few months and some of the horrendous actions of Trump and this administration. You started to answer my question, I think, but I'm going to go ahead and answer it and see if there's a little bit more to that. My feeling is that I question the legitimacy of this administration, and we have yet to find out the facts of whether there was collusion with Russia in the election. But he seems intent on dismantling our government and enriching himself and his billionaire cronies, and the level of corruption seems to be off the charts in this administration. So it's good news that a special prosecutor was appointed by the Department of Justice, but as you said, I think every avenue needs to be addressed. So there's a bill, S-27, that would establish that independent commission, I think, of independent experts to examine the facts. And have you co-sponsored that bill? And if you have not, then why? And also, there's a bill, S-26, that is about the Presidential Tax Transparency Act. And can you say something about that as well?
Sure. Thank you for that. I don't, off the top of my head, know what's in S-26 or 27. When I get back Monday afternoon, I will, in fact, it's probably going to end up in my reading binder now Sunday night, because I have multiple staffers here, and I'll get back to you about that. I think a special commission really does make sense. I don't know about the Tax Transparency Act. I just haven't looked at it yet. But I appreciate that. Listen, there are multiple concerns, right? It's not just collusion, it's possible violation, likely violation, in my view, of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution. It's a possibility of obstruction of justice. There are, I mean, you have to gather yourself to list the transgressions, all of which are beyond anything that I've even considered possible. So we'll pursue every avenue, but we need pressure from the public.
Evan Price, proud father of Carolyn Price, your intern, high school intern, hopefully a college intern. Carolyn's going to Wellesley, and thank you for your encouraging to Kauai's youth. I noticed in the audience, Kate McCorrick's parents are here. You gave a recommendation for their daughter to go to not Naval Academy. I'll get in trouble for that. It's, the Army. West Point, so rah-rah. So the Democratic Party is a big tent, and it's very difficult. I would just want to comment, the timing on bringing forth our particular pet issues has to be tempered to first get people elected to the major local, state, and national offices. And pursuing certain pet projects actually can be counterproductive to getting people elected nationally. So for your pet projects, wait to push those forward until after the election, as opposed to so much in the primary, and because you give ammunition to the opposite side when it's kind of real peripheral issues get a lot of publicity. So my comment is, I appreciate your discussion about balance, reaching across the aisle. Charles Grassley in Iowa, you have to have a relationship with him and cooperate on some agricultural issues to get the big budget and other things that are the priority big movers. So please allow your elected representatives their discretion to compromise a tiny bit on some issues that you feel passionate about, so that he can actually deliver the big picture progress, the big picture budget. So just be passionate about your pet projects, but be cognizant of the opportunities lost if you only focus on the tiny things that you're passionate about and let the big picture things, the opportunity lost costs that affect big things happen. So I'm just, if you want to comment a tiny bit about balance and why that's important and why cooperation and reaching across the aisle is helpful for our overall goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Listen, I think, I tried to say it at the beginning. I just think you can be a proud and sometimes ferocious, tough progressive, and that doesn't prevent you from doing regular appropriations on a bipartisan basis. That doesn't prevent you from having friendships with members of the Senate on the opposite side of the aisle. One of the new friendships that I've developed is I'm now the ranking member of the Military Construction and VA subcommittee for appropriations, and Jerry Moran from Kansas is just good people. We don't go out of our way to talk about certain issues because we know we're not going to be able to find common ground, but when it comes to funding the requirements of our men and women in uniform, when it comes to taking care of those who are no longer in the service, who are in VA care, he's an incredible colleague. And so, maybe part of it is, as I look at the people whom I admired in terms of their Senate tenure, they all certainly had liberal voting records, but not necessarily. I mean, if you look at Dan, right? He was one of the top 10 most liberal members of the United States Senate. But if you gave people, 25 words to describe Dan Inouye, liberal wouldn't have entered their lexicon. He was thought of as a statesman. He was a close friend of Orrin Hatch and Ted Stevens and all of that. And so I think you get to be as tough as you want on some of these issues, and just as long as you keep an open dialogue, everybody except Ted Cruz is willing to work with you. It's not true. Just to be fair to Ted, we've played basketball together and we've co-sponsored things. I'm just making fun. It was too tempting. I beat him.
Marion McHenry.
Hi, my name is Ruby Papp, and my question is about climate change. Given the news yesterday about Trump's withdrawal from the climate accords, I don't think I was very surprised, but I'm still very dismayed and concerned for our state and for the world and for our country. And wondering if you could provide, I've heard all the sound bites, I've watched a lot of news. Could you provide a little bit of hope, insider baseball? Insider baseball and kind of what you think's going to happen next, how we can move forward in the face of this massive challenge. I know Hawaii just has stepped to the plate with its own legislation to sign on. However, it's got a very small budget of $40,000. How are the states going to carry the weight when the government is not leading at the federal level?
So let me give you several reasons to be hopeful. The way the accord is structured, we cannot vacate the accord officially until November 4th of 2020, which happens to be the day after the next presidential election. And by the way, I'm going to skip over the part where I talk about what an outrage this is and how disappointed I was and all the rest of it. I'm just going to give you the good news. The good news is that officially we can't pull out until after there's a new president. And then I would assume we won't pull out. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that from the standpoint of federal law, there were basically two or three mechanisms to get us to do more clean energy. The first is funding for clean energy programs in the United States Department of Energy, ARPA-E, and the energy efficiency programs in DOE, and the small line items in the Department of Defense budget that have to do with energy. So those line items continue. So it's federal funding for energy research continues. Okay. The other piece at the federal level is the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. And we got a long-term extension of the ITC and the PTC going beyond 2021, which means, or 21, depending on the solar versus wind, it's 21 and 23. But the short version is we actually have solar and wind investment and production tax credits in the federal law. Whatever Donald Trump wants to say, that's still the law. Okay? And then the other mechanism was the President Obama's Clean Power Plan, right, which was the EPA treating carbon as the pollutant that it was and requiring each state or region to reduce carbon pollution under the Clean Air Act. That's the thing that obviously is not going to be implemented under Donald Trump, but let's be clear, it was stopped. There was a stay in a federal court, a Texas federal court under Obama, so it was never implemented. I wasn't pleased about that, but all the progress that we were making under Obama had to do with the ITC and the PTC and federal funding and states and regions taking the lead. None of that changes. What has changed is the geopolitical context, right? And I don't want to diminish the importance of American leadership, as Secretary Madeleine Albright always talks about the United States as the indispensable nation. When problems need to be solved, we're the ones to step up. And so what we lost is our position of leadership. What we lost is our ability to convene, especially smaller countries, to stay in the accord. But we have not lost the fight. And I will tell you, so I knew all of that, and I was sort of like mentally preparing yesterday to say that first to myself, and then in public, right? But I will tell you the other thing that has given me great hope is the CEO of Disney pulled out of the president's Business Advisory Council. Elon Musk pulled out of the president's advisory council. GM and Ford were critical. Amazon, Google, lots of American businesses, GE, Jeff Immelt from GE, Dow Chemical. I mean, these are not Democrats. Maybe Musk, I don't know. But these are folks who stepped up and said, no, that's not what we're doing. The Republican governor of Maryland was critical. The Republican governor of Massachusetts was critical. And as you know, Jerry Brown and Jay Inslee and Terry McAuliffe and Andrew Cuomo all came together and said, we're going to coalesce around cities and states. And I know, I've talked to Bloomberg a lot about this. He, as of 4 months ago, said federal government is not going to be useful when it comes to climate. The action is in cities and regions and states. Now, I wasn't prepared to accept that premise because, you know, I kind of went to the Senate, at least partly to try to fix the climate problem. So, but the point is, You have, I think it was 71, it was either 61 or 71 cities that stepped up immediately yesterday. You had a dozen or so big CEOs step up immediately yesterday. You had the EU, you had Germany, you had China, you had Brazil, you had India step up and say, we're still in and we're doubling down. And so have hope. This is definitely a punch in the stomach, no doubt about it. But have hope. And what we're doing in Hawaii is not trivial. I will tell you, I was at COP21. I was in the Paris. I was meeting with people from other countries, and for me to be able to tell the story of what we've been able to accomplish in the state of Hawaii and say, oh, and by the way, unemployment is 3.6%, right? And by the way, we've driven costs for electricity down, not up, as we increase the percentage of our portfolio that comes from wind and solar. That is a story that is absolutely compelling across the world. Now, we should move to clean energy for our own economic vitality, but it's also an incredible opportunity to tell a story of an innovation economy and self-sufficiency that I think lots of other countries, cities, states, islands can emulate. So don't give up the fight. I sort of had to dust. I'll tell you, I was not okay for about 45 minutes. But I started to gather my thoughts and said, look, this is, the other way to look at this is this happened on November 8th. This happened on November 8th. So, thank you.
Jonathan J.
Hi, my name's Marion McHenry, and I just want to thank you for coming to Kauai. And also thank you for, obviously you're making it more clear today how conscientious you are on our behalf and how progressive you have been in the U.S. Senate and especially on the environmental issues. And we really thank you for that. There's two environmental issues that are affecting Kauai. One very recently that I've just noticed in the past month, and I think it has to do with the Donald Trump rattling sabers with Korea. But we've been having these huge aircraft fly very low over homes and public areas where there's children and family playing, and they're huge, very loud, and extremely low. And I don't know what kind of influence you have on the military. They do need to do their training, especially in the situations that's set up now by our president. But I think until war is at our doorstep, it's good for them to be considerate of the civilian life. And the other environmental issue that we deal with in our state, we tried to address it on the county level and we're shot down. On the state level, nothing has happened. Are these widespread use of restricted use pesticides? This is an environmental degradation, a health hazard for our people, and it's getting to be very discouraging. No matter how hard we've been working on a local level, nothing seems to be happening for us. So if you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, thank you. Actually, on both of these, I want to follow up. I don't know anything about low-flying aircraft, but we actually have a challenge with aircraft in the east side of the Big Island, which we're digging into. And you're right, it's challenging. And the FAA provides limited jurisdiction as it relates to just noise. There's not a lot of, of ability to change flight paths based on noise, but you can convene processes that can sort of explore alternate flight paths. And sometimes it's the discretion of the pilot who may be going a shortcut, which is just slightly quicker, but maybe not the flight path as it's written down, but we'd be happy to follow up through our staff. I should mention, where is Clyde Kodani? Clyde Kodani in the back, stand up for us, please. Clyde Kodani lives on Kauai and he works for me. He has a day job, but he does work for our office. And so anything that ever comes up, he's my Kauai field rep. We also have Malia Paul is my deputy chief of staff. She's based on Oahu. I have Dale Hahn, my senior policy advisor. Sarah Kaupuiki, my Director of External Affairs, and Carissa Nakamura with the camera over there. There you go. And she just sort of takes care of me. And so we have a lot of staff here, and we'd be happy to follow up. On the restricted use pesticides, frankly, I don't know enough to render an opinion because some of this is a matter of how state and federal law fit together. But I'd be happy to do whatever I can to try to make sure that, obviously, air quality is maintained. And if there's anything I can do, we'll try to do it together. But I don't want to start getting over my skis and not understanding the intersection of state and federal law. And whether this is a question for the legislature or my side of the shop, I just don't know. But maybe we can sit down and talk about it. Last question?
Thank you very much for coming here today. It's really wonderful to have a chance to actually speak with our senator. My name is Jonathan Jay, and I've been a volunteer for Kauai Community Radio, KKCR, for about 10 years now. And recently I'm on the board of directors. And I'm very honored and pleased and proud that we are broadcasting live this event today so that not just people in the room, but everybody across the island and even on Oahu too can listen, because we get a brand new transmitter on 88.9. So big shout outs to Oahu. My question for you is, could you please help us? Because recently, because of not just the Trump administration, but also because of some peculiarities of the CPB, the Commission for Public Broadcasting, the way the metrics, the things they measure, and how they decide what you qualify for or not, they have determined that here on Kauai, we are neither rural nor serving any minority communities. And the reason for that is because the metrics that they're using, the actual what they're measuring is we don't have a large Hispanic or African American population, so therefore we're not providing any minority service. And then I don't know how they calculate the people per square mile, but somehow when we went from 60,000 to 72,000, we popped some kind of ceiling. Anyway, long story short, our funding is dramatically threatened. And it's not something that we can say, oh, hey, can you please review that? We need bigger muscle to come in and say, hey, you guys need to do this a different way.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for what you do. So the answer is, I don't know that I can't promise success, but I can promise you we'll work with you on it. This is not dissimilar to, other federal agencies have designations related to what's rural or urban, or even related to sort of the income level of a neighborhood. So we have some areas, for instance, on the Waianae Coast on Oahu, and everybody's there and the income levels are the same. A new development comes in and the homes are at the 1.2 to 1.5 level, and suddenly the neighborhood is not disadvantaged, right? Because it's in the same geographic area, and once you blend all those household values, it pops. USDA has designations related to what's rural, but they have a tremendous amount of discretion. Most of these agencies do not make these determinations.
It requires the act of Congress, yeah.
Well, no, I was going to say it the other way around. Most of these are not statutory. They're not in the federal law. They're agency determinations, because it's hard for me to accept that there would be a federal law that would specify, for instance, Hispanics and African Americans count as minorities but not other non-Caucasians. That would be a pretty bad law. I mean, we were capable of making bad law, but that seems especially bad. So long story short, we've been able, I would say, we've probably had 5 of these. We've been able to fix like 3 of them. So we'd be happy to work with you and see what we can do.
Well, that's great. We thank you. Thank you so much. We're not hurting because we get tremendous support from the community. Our support from the community has never been stronger. So thank you to everyone who's listening and helping out with KKCR. So we're not hurting, but we could use some help, and we could do even better, because we love to do stuff like this and we want to be able to do it more. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So let me just let me thank everybody for being here. I know it's a weekday. I know this was kind of a long session, but I really, really appreciate hearing from all of you. Some of you didn't get a chance to ask your question verbally, we take all the cards and we will, am I able to say we will get back to everybody? Well, I'm saying it. We'll get back to you. We'll get back to you all in writing. You know, I got asked yesterday what's the best way to be in contact with my office, and I would just say whatever way you want is fine. If you want to use the internet, if you want to email us, if you want to fill out a form, I want you to know the form on our website is not a black hole. It actually goes to a person, and I approve all the letters that go out in response. So human beings, you know, still respond. We get anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 letters a week from people from Hawaii, and we try to get back to everybody within, no promises, it depends how complicated your question is, but we try to get back to everybody promptly, I will say. But however you want to communicate with me, whether it's by phone or by traditional mail or by email or by talking to Clyde Kodani or by Facebook, just do it how you want, because I think nowadays we can't expect you all to communicate with me in one way. I'll just end with this. Yes, it's an incredibly challenging time for the country, but I'm more determined and I am more committed than ever to represent our values in the United States Senate. And I do remain confident that we will come through all of this. We will come through all of this. Our country is better than our president. We are a country of laws, not of people. Our institutions are being challenged right now. Some of them are stepping up, some of them are not. But all of us together are going to make sure that our republic survives and thrives. So I thank you for the opportunity. Every time I do one of these town halls, I feel personally invigorated. So I'll get on the red eye on Sunday night, ready to get back in the fight. So thanks, everybody.